that dominates the debate over immigration reform. Let me start off by asking you this. Why are people hysterical over the issue of immigration? And we're not talking about hysterical as in funny, ha-ha. We're talking about hysterical in the fact that people are extremely emotional about this issue, and they often don't think straight about the different perspectives on this issue.
Well, this happens pretty much everywhere. I mean, I've seen the same intensity of fear in the United States as I have seen it in other parts of the world. There is a, I think, tendency for people to regard immigration, at least in parts of the population, as mostly an invasion, a threat to a long-held position in society. And that translates into very specific types of myths, including the fact that the economy is going to be hurt. In fact, the fact that the culture is going to be somehow altered or modified, and so from there spring a lot of other perceptions or misperceptions, rather, about the impact that this sudden influx of people from outside of the community is going to have on one's community. It's part of human nature, really. It's widespread.
You know, I think there are lots of people who look at this just in a dollars and cents question, that if America changes its immigration policy, that the immigrants are costing, especially quote illegal immigrants, are costing Americans a lot of tax money. You've got a chapter in the book called "Do Immigrants Cost More Than They Contribute?" What's the answer to that question?
Oh, definitely not. I know that that's, again, a widespread perception, but that's not really true. What happens is that when you factor in everything, including the contribution that immigrants are making, or in the case of those that are not documented at this point but will become documented in the future, will make for the rest of their active and working lives, and you also factor in the younger generation of kids who are in school right now but who will eventually contribute to the economy. If you factor all of that in, and of course the impact that immigrants will have not only as producers and consumers themselves, but on other people in America, you will definitely conclude that the contribution is going to be much greater than what they receive in benefits. There's been a number of very well-respected studies about this. I'm not going to quote all of them because it would just take forever, but there's one very interesting one that was conducted by, and it's become almost the standard for this. It was conducted by the National Research Council, and that was updated a few years ago. And the conclusion was, if you took all of that into account, and you took into account, say, the next 50 years in the case of immigrants, because they're very young, so let's assume they can work for another 40 or 50 years. If you take all of that into account, their conclusion was they represented a net cost of just $5,000. That's the present value of all those years into the future. You weigh that, you balance that against their contribution to the economy and the contribution, again, not only as producers and consumers, but also through the impact they will have on other Americans. And the benefits just far, far outweigh the costs.
We are interviewing Alvaro Vargas Llosa, who is Senior Fellow of the Center on Global Prosperity at the Independent Institute. He is author of the book we're discussing with him, Global Crossings, Immigration, Civilization, and America. Alvaro, let me just say that I always, when I have guests on this particular issue, on most other issues, I've kind of got my perspective set. I mean, I can learn things and might have my mind changed here and there. But on this issue, I've got to say it's a bit of a Gordian knot for me personally. So I want you to help me in this program try to understand some of these issues. The reason I say that is I'm half Italian, half Greek. I joke about that on this program. But my dad is third generation Italian. My mom was first generation. She's passed away, but she came over with her family as a little girl to this country. So I remember going it's in Lowell, Massachusetts, to visit my grandmother on my mom's side, my grandparents, and my family, my cousins, aunts, and uncles. And I remember being in neighborhoods where if you went to a corner store, they spoke Greek. Everybody spoke Greek. You turned on the radio, the local radio station was all in Greek. You heard Greek music coming from the windows. So I look at that, and I personally don't have any sense of threat. I understand why people, when they come to a new country, they congregate to be able to help one another and speak. They can't speak the language oftentimes. Almost all my family on my mom's side spoke broken English for many, many years. So here's the problem for me. I don't know how to separate out the personal feelings I might have for human beings. If I was stuck in Mexico, particularly with all the problems they're having economic with drug wars and so on and so forth, I would try to come to this nation to be able to provide for my family. And yet, from a more intellectual viewpoint, I look at these issues like protecting the border and not wanting drug gangs coming over here, not wanting terrorists coming over here. So how does one separate out the emotional, human perspective from the kind of law and order? We have laws. How do you separate out those things in an issue that's this contentious?
Well, first of all, it's very hard to do, and those are very legitimate issues that you raise. I mean, clearly people do not want a large amount of citizens or just human beings operating in the shadows outside of the law in a country that prides itself on respect for the rule of law and being governed by the rule of law. Clearly that's a major issue. And another major issue in this day and age, of course, is the national security aspect of this that you mentioned as well. Well, the way I would respond to that, and I certainly go into that in my book as well, is basically twofold. One is basically the fact that if you are able to channel the overwhelming majority of immigrants through the legal system, you will have a much better way of monitoring what's going on, of just separating the wheat from the chaff, as it were, rather than the situation you have now, in which clearly 11 or 12 million people operating in the shadows is not something that's going to give anybody comfort. Why does that happen? It happens because there's a great separation or divorce, if you want, between the law and reality. In other words, the law is not accommodating the number of immigrants that the economy, perhaps not now, but until a few years ago, was demanding. And when that happens, generally there tends to thrive a black market, because that's the human response to any disconnect between the law and reality when a large number of people are affected. And so if you can get a system in place that adapts to supply and demand in a more adequate way in the future, you will see that most of the immigrants will be coming in through the legal channels. It's happened before in U.S. history. Between the 1940s and 1960s, for instance, there was this guest worker program called Bracero. There were other aspects to this that were, I think, legitimately criticized. There were some abuses and so on. But generally speaking, it was a system that was able to accommodate pretty much every immigrant that the economy demanded. And so you had very, very negligible, almost illegal immigration. So if we had a system like that in place, I think the national security issue could be taken care of as well. And just one more point about this. It's important to note that in many cases, the terrorists who have been able to get into the country and operate in the country and be involved and have been involved in attacks on U.S. soil are people who actually were able to come in through the legal system rather than through the illegal channels, which I think really indicates that the problem is not so much, or was not so much, immigration policy as counterterrorism policy, because at the time you had a system in place in which it really what really mattered was what country your travel originated in. And because many of these people originated in Germany, and Germany was not, of course, on the list of sponsors of terrorism, nobody really took care of them. So that was really a failure of intelligence, I would say, rather than of immigration policy. Because let's say you would have had a much stricter immigration policy, in other words, much fewer immigrants allowed in, much smaller or lower ceilings and quotas, they would probably have gotten in because they originated their travel in Germany and they had enough money to support themselves and so on. So again, I would not place the responsibility so much in immigration policy as on counterterrorism policy on that front.
This very week, there is hot debate up in Washington, as you know, about the Gang of Eight and the huge, the massive immigration reform bill. I'm wondering, and it's hard, I know, it's such a big bill, so many hundreds of pages, but in light of what you have written in Global Crossings, how do you feel about this bill that they're debating this week?
Well, I'm one of the few people who's actually read it, I think, because it's very, very long. But I actually took the trouble to read it. Well, incidentally, it's divided into 4 titles, and the first title is entirely devoted to borders and border security. And even Title 3 is partly devoted to that as well. So they've clearly address that issue, and not only that, they're very, of course, aware of the fact that there's a lot of pressure from just people at large in the country on this. I think much will depend on the amendments and how much it is modified. The bill at this point is I think a step in the right direction. There are a few problems with it. I think one of them is just making the transit from a permanent resident status from temporary resident status to permanent resident status conditional on a 90% rate of success in terms of apprehensions at the border. I can see how that will create problems in the future and a whole legal wrangle because it's going to be very hard to prove that. And the other problem is that they establish very concrete, specific quotas and ceilings on different categories of immigrants, and I'm just worried because the experience in the past has been that it's almost impossible for legislators to anticipate the exact numbers that are needed by the U.S. economy, according, of course, to what period of the cycle we're in. But apart from that, clearly they're trying to correct the present situation by creating a path to citizenship, and it really will depend on how many amendments are introduced and how many changes are made. The worry, of course, is that it'll be watered down so much in terms of the political compromises that will need to be made that this will be almost toothless by the time it gets to being passed. It's just a fear I have, but we'll have to see.
We're talking to Alvaro Vargas Llosa, who's senior fellow of the Center on Global Prosperity at the Independent Institute. We're discussing his new book called Global Crossings: Immigration, Civilization, and America. Alvaro, one of the problems I have with this whole issue is, it seems to me, in my perspective, I'm not an expert on this issue at all, that it seems like the system is broken, and because of maybe competing interests, I'm not sure how you explain it. I want you to help me understand, how did we get here to this state of breakdown where we have, and the numbers vary, but you mentioned 11 to 12 million here who are illegal or undocumented, however people want to characterize them. Many of them came here looking for work. Many of them came here with legal visas, but they overstayed those. They had set up homes, so they decided, as you said, to stay in the shadows. How does a system like this break down? I mean, how does it become so inefficient? And how do we know that this new law, if it gets passed, and as Ray pointed out, it's very controversial, we don't know if it will, how do we know that that's going to solve it? How do we know it's not going to continue to break down? What are the forces that are causing this inefficiency? Why are we at this point? How do we